Hey everyone, and welcome to my guitar obsession of the week with one of my favorite Beatle tracks and one of my favorite Beatle riffs, And Your Bird Can Sing. Now, I tend to get extremely focused on something when I start working on it, and everything else I'm working on seems to fall away and get shut down. That is my personality, I guess. For good or bad. As for guitar, it's usually a pretty good thing. And this week, it was nailing this really tricky riff from the Beatles. A riff to a song written by John Lennon, who actually considered it a rubbish throwaway from the band's brilliant 1966 album Revolver. Weird. Anyway, I actually learned this one somewhat adequately a while back as it showed up on Guitar World magazine's Top 100 Solos list at number 69. Well, not really a solo per se, it's more of a riff or a melody line. I was a little bit surprised to actually see it show up on Guitar World's Top 100 Solos list, but it was there, so I learned it. Is it a riff? I like to think of it as a riff. It's certainly not a solo, like I said. It's a guitar melody line repeated a number of times throughout the song, and I guess that's what we'd consider a riff, and it's my video, so I'm calling it a riff. Now, I suppose it's also a bit of a misnomer in my description to call something tricky or difficult or hard when one plays it in an unorthodox manner, because this is not the way that George Harrison played it on the original recording from Revolver. I guess one could call that reverse cheating, taking something simple and making it difficult just for the sake of difficulty. Even the simplest of guitar riffs, Whole Lotta Love by Led Zeppelin, can be made extremely difficult were one to play it wrong-handed, standing on your head and blindfolded. But as far as Your Bird Can Sing goes, I don't think it really falls into this category, as it's a fairly well-known guitar exercise to play on one guitar for those of us up to the challenge of it. And it has some interesting stories attached to it in that regard as well. Most notably by a fella you may have heard of by the name of Joe Walsh. Now, just going to backtrack slightly. Like I said, this is not the way that George Harrison originally played this riff. The original is actually two guitars, multi-tracked, playing in harmony, George Harrison and Paul McCartney. It is one of the first, if not the first known recording of twin harmony guitars in rock and roll music, which of course would go on to become a rather common technique going forward into the 70s and 80s. Most notably, after this recording by the twin guitar attack of Duane Allman and Dickie Betts of the Allman Brothers Band in the late 60s and early 70s, and then loads of other two guitar bands throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s, including the Eagles, Thin Lizzy, Judas Priest, Iron Maiden. Probably the only time you're going to hear the Eagles and Iron Maiden in the same sentence. And I'm also going to throw in the great Canadian band April Wine here as well, because I'm Canadian. And they had a three-guitar attack, and they often utilized triple guitar harmonies on occasion. But back in 1966, when the album Revolver was recorded by the Beatles, it was something totally new, and this led to much confusion for a young guitar player still learning his craft from Cleveland, Ohio, the aforementioned Joe Walsh. As a teenager, Joe was obsessed with this piece and had no idea that it was actually two separate guitars playing in harmony. How could he actually? Because like I said, it hadn't really been done before. Joe Walsh just assumed that it was one guitar. As a youngster still honing his skills, he worked on it for ages, tirelessly for months. He would go over and over and over again, the ridiculously tricky finger maneuverings to get it down, and he finally mastered it. He must have thought George Harrison was some kind of wizard to put down such complex and intricate guitar lines. A few years later, when Joe Walsh started to achieve some level of success himself, he apparently met Ringo Starr and began discussing the song with him and just how George Harrison went about creating and playing that incredible riff, explaining to Ringo his long periods of frustration trying to master it. Ringo apparently looked at Joe like he was nuts, laughed and said, "No, dummy, it was multi-tracked. It was two separate guitars playing at the same time, George and Paul." Now, instead of feeling the fool for his months and months of work mistakenly mastering this riff on one guitar, he decided to look on the brighter side of things. He proudly thought to himself, "I am the only person in the world who can play this on one guitar, including George Harrison." And for a number of years, I'm sure that he was right. Nowadays, with YouTube tutorials and tabs and whatnot, lots of guys and girls can play it on one guitar, including myself. But it's not easy, not in the least. When I first learned it last year for the Top 100 solo list, I played it the original way with the twin guitar harmonies, but I also spent about a week working on the one guitar version and amended that to the end of the two guitar version. I wasn't completely happy with my one guitar take on the track. I'd never really mastered it in the week that I spent with it. I'd give myself maybe like a 6 out of 10 for my efforts. And I've always wanted to revisit it and master this tricky riff properly. So here we are. I relearned it and have spent the past 6 or 7 days playing nothing but. And now I've got it, I think. And now I'm going to show you guys how to play it. Now the harmonies to this are in thirds and sixths. Sixths. It's not easy to say. So the notes are usually only a half step or a full step apart on a different string, which makes it possible to play this, though, like I said, extremely difficult. There's a heck of a lot of jumping around the neck trying to find the right notes. So let's dig into this, shall we? Should you feel like challenging yourself and driving yourself nuts for a few days, weeks, or months, like Joe Walsh. I'm not plugged in right now. I'm going to go get myself plugged in, maybe have a little change of scenery, and we'll get started. All right, so we're in standard tuning with this, and we're in E major, working in the E major scale on 2 strings. So we're mostly working at the beginning, at least, when we're harmonizing in thirds. We're on the G string and the B string, and this is it slowly. So we start off with an open E, and then we're going to grab 9 of the G string and the B string, and then down to 8 of the G string and 7 of the B, and then we're going to slide that down to 6 and 5 of the G and the B, and then back up to 9, or back up to 8 and 7, and then back down to 6 and 5. And then you're going to go to 4 of the G and the B, and then hammer on to 6 and 5 of the G and the B. And then we're going to go 4 down to 2. So 4 on the G and B and down to 2 on the G and B. And then now we're moving up to the D string and the G string. And that's 7-5 on the GB and then 5-3 on the GB. And then we're going to resolve it there at the 2nd fret of the D and the 1st fret of the G. So there's there's one slide right here, right there, and one hammer on right there. then you're finger picking every other little phrase. And then we're going to continue on. Then we're going to grab G. We're going to leave that chord there at the second fret of the D, first fret of the on the G. Then you're going to grab G and B. So the first fret of the G and open B, and then open B, open E. And then you're going to grab the fourth fret of the B and the second fret of the E, and then up to 5 of the B and 4 of the E. For 2 hits. So up to that point. Got that? One more time. Now we're going to give those 2 notes a half step bend each. And then release back to the natural note. And then we're into this tricky little lick. So you're going to get your finger on the second fret of the B, and then pick that note and the open E together, and then pull off the second fret to the open B. And then you're going to grab the first fret of the G with the open E, or with the open B. And then you're going to go on to the second fret of the G and the B together. And then down to the open B and the open E. And then you're going to slide into 5 and 4 of the B and the E. And then you're going to grab the second fret of the B and the E, and then pull them both off to the open strings. And then you're going to grab the first fret of the G with the open B. So up to that point from here. Okay, from the bend. From the bend again. And now we're into this really, really tricky bit. And playing that at speed is really tough. So we're coming out of the bends. So now we're in 6. We're harmonizing in 6ths. So we're going to grab the second fret of the G and the second fret of the E. And then we're going to move that up 2 spots. And then we're going to go from 6 on the G down to 5 on the E. And then up to 8 and 7, same strings, G and E. And then back it up 1. So you're basically moving it up and then moving it back down the same notes. And then back down, resolving it with the first fret of the G and the open E. And you're going to, at that point, you're going to pull off to that G string at the first fret. Both strings, pull them off. And now we're into this part. So we're on the D string this time at the 4th fret and the B string at the 4th fret, and then we're going up to 6 and 5, and then up to 7 on both strings, and then up to 9 on both strings. So up to that point from the bend. And then we're going to finish it up. Then we're going to back down to the G and the E string at 6 and 5, and then moving that up to 8 and 7, and then 9, 11, and then finishing the whole thing up at 13 and 12. So that whole little pattern there. Slide that part. And every one of those have to be picked. So one more time from the bend. And at this point, you're going to have to do a double. On the original recording, these notes are bent, but you can't. One of these is bent a full step, and the other is bent a half step. It's almost impossible to do that like this. You know, to bend one a full step and the other one only a half step. I suppose it can be done, but so instead of doing that, what you want to do is hammer on. You're at this here. You're at 13 on the G and 12 on the E. So you're going to do a double hammer on pull off to 13 to 14 on the G, and then 12 to 14 on the E. And that is tricky to get those fingers synced together. And then finishing up here. And that is 8 on the G and 7 on the E, and then 9 on the 9 on the D and the B, and then going down to 6 and 5 on the D and the B. So from this, so up to that point from the bend. And then this finishes up the song. And that's just the same thing that you did at the beginning. Slide down, pick, hammer on, and then you just repeat that 3 times. And then just finishing up with like a little A power chord there. And that's the whole thing. So I'll run through the whole thing slowly one more time. I forgot to mention that the first time. When you get to that point there, you're going to go back up and hit the open E. And that's it. And that is how you play that very difficult and tricky riff, lick, melody line. And I hope that helped you out, and I hope you like my stories. And we will see you next time. Take care of yourselves. Ciao.